Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Okay, guys, today's episode is actually a little bit about manifesting work and magic work. And it has to do with the importance of doing our ancestral work or our ancestral offerings, which can also involve resolving generational curses, which is about the same thing as generational trauma. Because an energy that carries forward over and over again that can be traumatizing has its origin in the poor choices that people make, usually from darker impulses, their shadow side, which then compounds things and often draws towards them either a karmic form of curse that was put into place, usually by the people who were wronged by your ancestors' greed or their envy or their inability to have empathy, or a couple of other things can cause generational curses, including, the man-stealing curse, all of that. And it can be very hard because if you haven't personally done anything wrong, it's like, well, what did I ever do that I'm the person who has to resolve all this generational karma? And you try to look at it a little bit differently because you live in a day and age where we have so much information available to us about how generational trauma, which again is, synonymous with generational curses in this particular, in spiritual work and energy healing. You live in a day and age where we understand the emotional foundation of people, our psychological construction, what mistreatment can do to somebody's partnership choices, their ability to have self-confidence, their ability to step into their higher self, being held back by their damaged shadow side. And your shadow side is the part of you that was formed in trauma. But we're talking also about the need to be very seasonally aware with the manifestation work we do and the energy healing that we do. The autumn. Now, if you're in Australia, again, you go with your autumn, not mine. But this will carry forward to, the 6 months from now for people in another hemisphere, because I do have some people in another hemisphere. And always thanks for joining me. Remember, you can start this work at any point and lessen the load come the autumn. So remember that. But why is the autumn the season that is most suited to doing our ancestral work? It is because it is right before winter, which is the time where everything is at rest, where we release the energy of the old to prepare for the new planting season, basically, of spring. And in the autumn, as we move towards October 31st, now this is where the whole hemisphere, please remember, October 31st is part of a magical tradition. So people in another hemisphere would also wish to honor their ancestors on those particular dates, because collective energy, most people are living in a different hemisphere, is one of the things that determines access. We want to think of it as, again, the easiest example is always crowd mentality. How people can swear up and down that I didn't mean to riot after that football game. I have no idea why I crashed in the window of a Gap store, but everybody else was doing it and I just kind of lost my mind, type of thing. I'm not sharing a personal story, but we've seen this happen, where things stand on a knife edge and, jubilation over victory turns to destruction because there's a collective energy that reaches a critical mass and things explode. And you want to look a little bit at your generational karma, your generational work, your need to do your ancestral work a little bit like that. The reason that so many of us are here to resolve that generational trauma is because we do live in a time of advanced knowledge and with fewer challenges to our survival. I'm going to pause here for a moment because I got to do my housekeeping because it's when you listen to it. But we're going to get back to this. I'm going to explain some things about generational karma, why it's the time, why it is the time and place, why there is a confluence of events that allows us to release these things and step into our true power, our true also abundance. So the autumn, where think about squirrels storing up nuts for the winter. The autumn is the best season for anything having to do with financial security, with financial gain, with anything having to do with financial curses or financial trauma, a deprivation mindset as well. So before we get started, if you need me to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session, in the tarot card readings that I do, I look into your subconscious issues to see what you need to heal so that you can step into your own power, so you can have access to your own intuition and be guided on your own path. Not everybody is actually psychic, but everybody has an ability to kind of weigh out their choices and be guided towards the best one for them within the space of a moment. If they have cleared all of their blockages, if they've cleared all of their attachments, and that's what I help people do. I also do predictive tarot, but I really, really enjoy the healing tarot that I do because it allows people to become the most powerful version of themselves. And if you want to book me for a reading for that, you do so at therisingmoon.com exclusively. It's the only way to book me. I will never approach you in comment sections. I will never approach you trying to sell you a reading or pretty much anything. The problem with having a social media presence at all is that we all have imposters, and we'll have people approaching people in comment sections, sending them emails, and they'll say things like, I was really drawn to you, but I do have to charge, so to give a reading, and you will never get a reading from that person. They're just scamming you. And there's just nothing we can do to prevent it other than ask people to be aware that, we don't do that. We don't do that. The real readers don't do that. We're not going to DM you. We're not going to message you. We're not going to try and sell you our stuff unless you're already a client of ours or interacting on YouTube and going through a website, as a for instance. I also have a Patreon where I give weekly and monthly, usually spirit guide advice. Again, the things that you're facing. We live in cyclical patterns of energy coming around again and again and again until we resolve things and until we solve them, which we are watching that in a historical sense as well. It usually happens about every 100 years, 100 to 80 years. We are living out a pattern that was seen within the last century, the century before that. We live out patterns. And that is also generational trauma. So I have a Patreon that's linked in the episode notes. It's also in the description box down below if you're watching the video versions of this. And the video versions of this are available on my YouTube channel, Cronecast, At the Rising Moon, with At the Rising Moon, all is one word. Some people like the video versions, some people like the audio versions. Audio versions, everything is in the episode notes. Video versions, everything is in the description box down below. So that's how you can find me if you would like to access that as well. And you can always find me here at Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Let's get back to what we're talking about today. So what can happen with people when they're told you got ancestral work to do, you have ancestral curses to resolve? It can feel like, why me? Like, I didn't even do the bulk of that stuff. This can't be my karma. Well, I didn't do anything. No, but you may have benefited from the mistakes that people have made in the past with, taking resources that didn't belong to them or partners that didn't, driving partners away, that sort of thing. The energy carries forwards and it intensifies and becomes worse until such time as we confront the problem and we resolve it. We'll also find that present in codependency, where somebody doesn't really have the confidence to step into their own power. So if you are the curse breaker in your generational line, and if you're listening to me, there's a very high chance you're your curse breaker, it isn't because you're being afflicted, it's because you volunteered. You may not believe that, no, I wouldn't have volunteered for this life. I get that our ego, which is very invested in our feelings and how much things hurt, 100% is like, I would not have done this to myself, but we all have a higher self that is like, I can do it. I can do it. I believe in myself. I have the power. And you are the most powerful person in your generational line, even if you're resolving generational trauma. It relies on your willpower. Almost everybody with compounded generational trauma has immense willpower. Now, every now and then, because that's what it takes to break these things, that's the good news about generational trauma and generational curses. You just have to be strong. You just have to believe in your own power. You have to stay the course, and it will take longer to resolve than you want it to, because if it was easy to resolve, it would have been resolved by now. Every now and then, willpower will take a wrong turn into stubbornness. I've seen that with a lot of people, particularly my fellow earth signs, particularly my fellow Taurans, where your willpower like turns towards digging in your heels and being unbudgeable and never being able to admit when you're wrong, type of thing. And that is, again, an inward-facing view of something that is meant to be facing outward. So if you are really stuck in stubbornness, understand that that is your biggest blockage, and that is the thing that you need to resolve. And that is also a form of generational curse and generational trauma, because it takes your willpower, which is meant to manifest the life that you want, to accomplish your dreams and your goals. That becomes something that entrenches you in an inability to change. And in order to manifest absolutely anything, you have to be willing to change things, because that's what manifestation is. It's transmutation of energy. It is taking one state of being and transforming it into something else. So I think I've explained generational trauma carrying forward and generational curses, and that it's not about fault. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what our ancestors really are. which if you're thinking about, I know my grandmother, I know my great-grandmother, I have this wedding record, I went to ancestry.com and I know you do not know everywhere that you came from. I very clearly have Viking influence in everything that I'm drawn to. I also have anything having to do with Southeast Asia and India, which makes perfect sense because I got a bunch of Brits in my background as well. That, you don't remember all of your ancestors, and you don't know the things that led them to the choices that then burdened you with this particular energy, often of having done one group wrong in order to survive. When you live in the modern age, in most westernized countries, survival is not, you're not always in survival mode. And people cannot heal in survival mode because they basically are trying to get from one meal to the next. It's not even about paying bills. It literally was, most of your ancestors came from a time where a bad harvest could cause an entire village, entire families to starve, to go without, to become desperate. When we are desperate, when our back is against the wall, we are more likely to engage in behaviors that are not worthy of us. Instead of pulling together, people start to be like, it's every man for himself. And that causes this generational energy that needs to be resolved. When it comes to why ancestral work is the most important work to do for financial security, so many generational curses. And this is like actual, like, hey, native people, not just in the United States and Canada and Sweden and Norway. You can look almost anywhere on the globe, study some ancient history, and you find out that the people that were there are no longer there because somebody came along and took their stuff, because resource acquisition was at the root of most wars. That is something that gets carried forward. A lot of very like in touch with the land and the elemental powers that actually do dictate things like karmic justice. If you come from a people that wrong those people, unless you have always been standing in opposition of it, you're carrying that karma forward. And it's not about blame. Like, it's just about recognition of like, okay, I know that makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things that I've been having to resolve is a really poor relationship to work. I come from, on my mother's side, I don't know that much about my grandmother's family, but my grandfather's family, a long line of coal miners. He became the manager of the mine because he was exceptionally bright, but he did have to go work in what are called the pits at 13 because it was a matter of basic survival. And that's revisiting the, hey, you're part of the reason it falls to you is that we are part of a modern age in which we are not as likely to run out of everything and be forced into terrible, terrible choices just out of survival. We're not sending our 13-year-olds into factories and into mines in most places. And may that continue, by the way, because, child labor is one of the things that cuts off a person's potential and divorces them from the higher self concept as they are stuck in survival mode. That's what happened to a lot of abused children, is that they were parentified. I was parentified. A lot of people were, where I took on a lot of adult responsibilities as a very young person. I had zero choice in it. Like, I didn't even know it was wrong until I was an adult. And I had to recover from a lot of extreme damage. And I've discussed like what an insanely abusive background I have. And whenever I laugh like that, it's not because it's funny, it's a trauma response. I see it in other trauma survivors as well. I had to resolve all of that. And then after that comes the work, because what releasing our generational karma and doing our ancestor work really is finding the best person that you can be, with the best intent towards yourself and others, knowing that it is actually wrong to harm others to meet our own goals. We have a system currently that is very much based on the screw the worker people, as long as the billionaires just keep, accumulating more and more money beyond what they could ever spend. And like, if that doesn't, that's a poor use of resources. It's a unfair distribution of power, which is another thing that leads to this need to do this generational work. And you can be freed from that structure if you examine what you're trying to achieve and what you find value in. And one of the easiest ways to do generational work to honor your ancestors is in the simple act of gratitude. Right? It's like, it's shockingly easy to do some of this work. If we can use gratitude as a shaming technique in the spiritual world, like if something's really bothering you, it's like, to have an abundant life, you have to be grateful, be grateful, be grateful, be grateful, be grateful. And people are starting to learn that, use that as a bludgeon against themselves, to be like, don't have that negative feeling. This part will not work. Suppressing your shadow side just leads to compounded pain and to an increase of an energy. It's important to examine your real feelings and then examine how things are better. Like, you confront the darkness, you go through it. I feel this way because of that. I'm feeling this way. I'm deprived. This world is giving me hopelessness, whatever it might be. You confront those feelings. You learn how to have your inner dialogue around them. It is best to have an inner dialogue. One of the constructs of our current society is telling us that it's, have a support system, have a support system, have a support system, which is the same thing as saying you're not strong enough to stand on your own. Now, there really are instances where we need support, but it's the bulk of, you want to look at your life as being, 90 to 95% independent. And then every now and then we will have extreme enough circumstances with illness, with loss, with cataclysm, which is going on within the country and the world now, where exterior support, relying on that, becomes absolutely appropriate. But for the most part, if you want to stand in your power, you got to be independent, which means learning how to understand and support yourself through your own emotional process. And that is not to shame anybody out of seeking support. You all know, if you've listened to me for 5 minutes straight, that I'm always telling people to go to therapy. Therapists are trained in helping you understand your inner world. That support is often in your connection to other people rather than having them help you sort through your feelings, as a for instance. So relying on yourself does not mean being lonely. It does not mean being completely isolated from others. But that it is a self-sabotaging thing when we think that we need somebody else to hear us to validate our feelings. What we really need to do is to understand the feelings that we're having so that we can move forward and be as independent as possible, because that is the only way to truly access your inner voice, and is also the only way to truly access your inner power. Because it's just yours. You're a divine being, you're part of a collective, but you have a unique gift that can only come to you when you are in touch with your inner world. So you learn how to confront those dark feelings, talk yourself all the way through them. And the role of gratitude comes in understanding what remains and what is good, even if you don't have, and I've already addressed this in the happiness podcast, what you want, what you think you want. If you live a life where you're trying to appreciate what you have and find joy in the moment to moment, living in the moment to moment, that's true mindfulness, is being present within the moment, then more will come to you because you are appreciating and loving and having gratitude towards your life. But people struggle with the concept so much, so I'm going to give you a tool about how to be more grateful in your present moment. Everything that you're doing, ask yourself, would I miss this if it was gone? Since change and endings are inevitable, examine everything that you have with the eye towards things come and go. That's the energetic reshifting of balance to bring me more. Some must leave, so some can come in. So we have to accept that everything that we have can be lost. But that is not so that we cling to it with fear, but so that we can appreciate it and have gratitude for it within the moment. So whatever you're doing, if you're climbing into bed at night and you're like, oh God, this feels so good, stop and take a moment to affirm your gratitude towards it. I'm so grateful to have this wonderful bed to sleep in. I'm so grateful for this very comfortable room. It even smells good in here. When you're drinking your whatever it might be in the morning, I'm always going to say coffee, because again, the other thing that other people know about me is I'm usually highly caffeinated in the morning. When you're drinking your coffee, when you're drinking your tea, when you're having the water or whatever it might be in the morning, savor the idea that you have enough resources available to you to do that. We are watching the aftermath of multiple hurricanes, where people have lost so very much. One of the things I was thinking about when viewing that footage was my heart just went out to these people who, like, they woke up 3 days before they knew that storm was going to hit, and were probably really focused on the responsibilities, the chores, the feelings of being so burdened by their existence. And then 3 days later, everything's gone. Maybe the pets that they love have been washed away. Maybe their relatives, everything that they own. I mean, there's catastrophic destruction in the Appalachian Mountains. There just is. Because it wasn't supposed to be possible for a hurricane to go through there, so there was no infrastructure to deal with the flooding, with the water flow and things. And so I just really felt for them, because in that particular moment, they would have given absolutely everything just to have what they had lost back. And one of the ways that you can avoid that feeling of being bereft is to celebrate what you do have. And it's not because the universe will strip it away if you are not grateful for it. It is just that you will be truly enjoying it as a blessing. Half of what goes wrong in our lives is that we miss how blessed we are because we're so looking towards what we don't have. It's like, yeah, this is fine, but what else would make me happier? You stop, you look around, and the easiest tool in figuring out what you're grateful for is like my computer. Would I miss this? I would miss it so much. Would I miss the trees outside my window and the hummingbirds? And I would miss them so much. And every time that I realize there will be a hole in my life when this inevitably has to change, I remember to value what is here in the here and the now. When you stop and you realize I could lose this thing that I'm taking completely for granted, including your physical health, whatever it might be, it gives you an opportunity to really embrace it as such a gift and such a blessing in your life. That is the easiest form of ancestor work. It's the easiest form of ancestor work. Living in a grateful energy will make you kinder towards yourself and others, healthier. It will allow you to see the people around you as members of a community rather than, members of a opposite faction. And we always have to remember that no matter what somebody believes, something has encouraged them to believe that self. We have so many influences on our particular viewpoints that very few people think independently. Now, I have something called a lone wolf personality, and it took me a long time to realize that I had a lone wolf personality. I thought for a long time I was an introvert. And then I study constantly because I like to. I'm from a long line of teachers, and so I genetically come by it. I like to study a great deal. And as I studied more and more, I realized that aside from one thing that is frequently mentioned in the lone wolf personality, I actually really do like to be out in nature. But that also makes sense with the magic that I'm drawn to, which has elements involved in it. It's celestial and angelic magic, and it functions with the elements, air, water, earth, fire. And there's also the Holy Spirit, the spiritual connection. There's also manifestation, and there's also our desires, which has to be healed as well, which is a sacral chakra issue. But one of the things that we can always do when we're trying to work with our ancestral knowledge, I'm talking about the lone wolf thing. So I am an independent thinker. Like anybody who's encountered me for any length of time is like, oh my God, yeah, no, she's impossible. And I really genuinely am. Woe betide the person who tries to get me to do something or believe something that I think is wrong. It's not that I won't ever change my mind. I frequently do. And in fact, part of the reason that I'm always talking about, please remember the things that other people believe, even if you deem them hateful, even if you find them distancing, something has influenced them to believe that way. And so they may have had a very limited experience. And the reason that I know this so very, very deeply is that I've talked about this before. I started out in northeastern Pennsylvania in a former coal mining area. And my father taught at one of the universities, but he was not a very functional person. So he lost that job. And then he went to work at, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is very, very elevated. He was brilliant, but he was very, very damaged. And he had trouble holding jobs. So he only had that job for like 2 years. So I lived in this area, but I had all these distancing things about me. And then he abruptly died a couple of weeks before my 16th birthday. And I went to an Ivy League town, a very small Ivy League town. And so the contrast was extreme. So I went from these very conservative and traditional viewpoints where there were a lot of ethnic categories with Poles and Italians and people who came here. And it's always intrigues me that Europeans and other countries always think it's so strange that Americans identify as Italian American or Polish American. And they think it's ridiculous because well, you're American. Those groups were excluded and picked upon and treated as others. The Irish were, the Italians were, the Polish people were, you name the groups, the Lithuanians, and they were excluded. And so they did not become they preserved their culture as a way of having community because they were quite frequently afflicted and mistreated and viewed with suspicion. For all that the United States has always been immigration, bringing in labor, basically, has really built this particular country. For all that happens to be true, it doesn't mean that they were accepted and celebrated and elevated to power. And so that was part of the reason that I came from an area where people did not think very much about the otherism that we have a tendency to engage in because the world was aiming at them. They became very inclusive and exclusive of others. inclusive of people with the same background and exclusive of people with a different one. And then I went to a very, 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 very well-off town with people from all over the globe. And culture shock, absolutely, but it also gave me a completely different view on the world. And then I moved to another state halfway across the country that I had never visited in, that had a very transient population. It was Colorado. I lived there for a very long time. And then I went to a different state that was in the South, and I didn't live there very long. Then I ended up in California. I've been to different places in this particular country, and if you are familiar with this country at all, you know that we are like a bunch of disparate countries put together. If you go to North Dakota, that is not the same place as Arizona by a lot. And that it really does. We have different values, we have different viewpoints, we have different cultural influences, that we are one big country, but we are very, 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 very diverse, and that different things influence our viewpoint. And that to please keep that in mind when engaging in the idea that you are separate from others. There are influences on you as well. One of the things that I'm always encountering, and this does have to do with ancestral work, is determining what you think. If you want to resolve your ancestral karma, what you want to do in your ancestral curses, what you want to do is discover your individual voice, your ability to stand alone, to not be guided by the actions of others, because that happens in this world all the time. We see something wrong going on, but everybody's doing it, so we continue to do it. And that compounds and carries that energy forward in an ever-increasing mass. And things will get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until we decide we're going to resolve things in both our personal lives, and then it's the micro and the macro. It touches on both of them. And so one of the most important things that you can do in your ancestral work is to expose yourself to different viewpoints so that you can understand it, but not with an idea of I'm investing in that. It's just to understand that. Greater understanding of self and others is one of the things that comprises your ancestral work. So we're talking about all the stuff that we do outside of an altar, outside of an offering, to resolve the closed-mindedness that is also something that we're always trying to resolve with ancestral work. To step into your true power, which is both individual, but also fed by a collective. And that is the other thing you can do, being grateful within the moment. And the easiest tool within that is to ask yourself every single thing that you do, would I miss this if I couldn't do it any longer? And like for me, it's even my cards. It's like, I love tarot. I love what I do. It helps me as well. If it was suddenly gone from my life, there would be a giant, giant hole. I'm sure I'd find something else to fill it. But even thinking about would I miss this? It's like, yes, it would be like amputating one of my limbs. It really would be. So that also is one of the tools for appreciation. And appreciating what you have leads to you being less likely to compromise values, energy, and your higher self to gain more. It really is. You find a way to be happy within the moment. Doesn't mean you won't, the opulence, luxury, all of the things that could come to you when you have your true manifesting power. But purity of intent allows us to manifest at a much higher rate as well. So gratitude, being open to new ideas, always learning, expanding your horizons so that you invite in more collective power while determining your individual view. Your individual view, recognizing that everything you think, everything that you believe was taught to you in some capacity. And that quite frequently it's an insular view formed by being part of an insular community. Your feeling of belonging and validation led you to believe things that perhaps aren't fair or aren't kind to other people. And I'm not excluding myself. I'm really not. In that childhood that I speak of in northeastern Pennsylvania, one of the most shocking things that came to me was that even though I was the daughter of a history teacher, I had been taught things in school that were incorrect. They were incorrect. And the easiest example and the most shameful example, as far as I'm concerned, and although it doesn't stand alone, is how we were taught to view Native Americans and the history that we were taught and how we interacted with them. And in fact, when you look back at the real history, it's terribly, terribly, terribly shocking. And then the other thing, of course, was anything having to do with slavery and the Civil War. Because I did initially start out in a part of the country that taught me that it was about state rights. The only state right it was about was the right to own people. It was about slavery. It really was. And moving to a different area of the country that took a more liberal standpoint and looked at that differently as to whether or not it was fair to this poor group of enslaved people, slavery is something that's carried forward over and over again. I study a lot of ancient history. Please stop feeling so ashamed of repeating this pattern and instead examine it to see, well, how do we go about making it a more fair and equitable world so that we are not grabbing power in a way that is going to damage us and lead us further towards a shadow side instead of towards our greatest power, which is always towards our higher self. So expose yourself to new viewpoints and to understand that anybody that you disagree with, it may not be that there are, no, are there people who are simply not good? Yeah. It's a choice we all get to make. And that is one of the reasons you have to be pretty protective as you go forward and self-protective as you go forward in this world, is being open, but without being absolutely vulnerable to absolutely everybody. Is that there are different people who are led towards different things. One of the most shocking things that my ex-husband ever said to me, and then his brother would later echo, was that they really questioned whether or not, what was in it for them to be a good person. And I was like, wait, what? Like, because that is not what I have ever believed. That, like, one of the things that, even though I have not been a person who has always made the right choices in my life, my 20s, like I said, very, very colorful. I had to look at it as a standpoint of like, well, you know, deeply damaged by all forms of trauma. And I kept going towards being better and to forgive myself for that. But that it really came as a great shock to me that other people weren't always trying to get towards that. How do I be good? How do I be better? How do I keep going? And that was their base setting. And it's not even that I'm judging it. It was just shocking to me. It just genuinely was shocking to me. So expose yourself to other viewpoints in order to expand your power is what we're basically talking about. And that will also resolve the ancestral karma that may have caused an ancestral curse. Because if you have an ancestral curse, particularly in your money, if you're suffering from financial insecurity, the chances that you have a generational curse on you are vast, absolutely, absolutely vast. And that, you know, learning that it is not actually acceptable to do anything for gain, and that actually will worsen your karma. And it leads to people losing all emotional connection, which we see in billionaires. They're like drug addicts, always seeking new experiences, like trying to go down to the Titanic and something that, like, anybody, they're in a coal miner alive that would have been like, hey, I'll get in that. There really just genuinely isn't. That they have become so detached from consequences that they will do foolish things, trying to find more and more sensation to find a way, because they become desensitized to other people's pain. And it is a form of generational curse. Please don't think that the only way to be powerful is to have money. You can enjoy your life and be absolutely divorced from the machinations of the world around you. And that is a way of being very, very powerful indeed, and stepping into it and finding your spiritual source and your spiritual power and your magical power. And we really are influenced. One of the weirder things about what I do is that I do get influencers offers, like, fairly regularly. But you would just about die if you saw some of them. I only got one where I was like, well, at least I think you watched me, where they were offering me new glasses, a form of glasses frames. It was a designer eyeglasses. I clearly didn't take them up on it because I like my glasses. And it wasn't just that. As soon as you allow people to start, I allowed people to program what I was saying with getting me to promote things. The only thing I'll ever promote has to do with oracle decks and tarot cards. And it's always just a gift from, like, somebody I've interviewed or a client who's made an oracle deck. Or it's not, like, very few. I guess there's one card distributor that has sent me decks in the past. I feel completely comfortable with that because I'd be using them anyway. But I have had offers for hair removers, which I'm like, do you have any idea what I do? You can't possibly have anything idea what I do. I've gotten offers for makeup. I've gotten offers for jewelry. They remember, as soon as an influencer starts having brand deals, somebody else is controlling their message. And the message always at the root of it is how to make more money, how to make more money, how to make more money, without any regard to whether or not it's right for the person. I do recommend sources for healing sometimes. For instance, one of the best places to go for a lot of this work, they have all kinds of things, subliminals that you can fall asleep to or have playing in the background to help you release your financial curses and your generational trauma and your generational curses, is the Sound Healers on YouTube. And they have memberships and they have a couple of other things, but they also have plenty of things available for free. They have a large, diverse library of sound healings that is available for free. Now, whenever you interact with a free source, please remember, give something back. It's what allows that person to not be at the whim of influence, by the way, not to accept those brand deals so that they keep their message pure and their intent pure. But also it just creates space within you. If you give some of your energy, then you can take more because you've created space for it. So subscribe or hit that thumbs up button. It doesn't always have to be money. It is just the idea of I actively and consciously choose to give something back to someone who is giving me something. If we're always in gimme, 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 you will always lose everything. It is just part of karmic law. We have to maintain an energetic balance. And when we are resolving our generational trauma and our generational work, that is what we are doing, is we are restoring a balance. People were stuck in survival mode because, for real, we have no real concept of this in a world where the closest thing that we can come to in the US is that in COVID lockdown, there was, a dearth of toilet paper available, and people, whoa, the way people reacted over toilet paper, where it was very much a grab, get, store it, sell it for ridiculous amounts of money, take more than I could ever possibly humanly need, because they were acting from a place of fear. People make mistakes when they're in survival mode because most of their higher self has to shut down to maintain body and soul. We live in a time where that is less likely to happen. One of the ways to resolve that is to give freely of your time and energy. If you see a community in distress, you can help them out in the ways that you choose. Now, I did not actually mention this in the podcast where I mentioned Alane and what happened in the Appalachian Mountains. But I personally chose the United Cajun Navy to donate to. I didn't want to recommend a source because I do not like influencing people, but I've done very thorough research on that, and I believe that those people are really doing very good work in this world. And they are often some of the first people on the scene helping to alleviate the suffering of people who were just the victims of a natural disaster and living in an area that did not have a robust infrastructure, partially because of economic deprivation that had been carried down through the generations. So these are all the ways that you can work on this, is like choosing to be the best person that you can be, choosing to think of others as being equal to yourself. But there is actually magic work that you can do. When you set up, I'm going to start talking about altars. We've talked about how to manage it with the gratitude mindset, with the examining your choices, with making sure that you know what you think versus what somebody else is telling you to think. And am I telling you what to think? If the way that I'm telling you is find different sources, compare, contrast, decide what you think. And that is where my little lone wolf personality was cemented in me by my, somewhat non-functional, he was incredibly non-functional, crazy, violent, most people were scared of him father, to teach me something very, very important, which is that, I have my own mind and to make up my mind for myself. And that has been one of my saving graces throughout the course of my life, is being able to have my own guiding voice, to know who I am, who I'm meant to be, and who I'm trying to be in every single moment. And if it's in variance with what the other people of this world want, well, too bad, they're not me, and I'm going to keep doing me. And that the you do you thing, can you be guided towards, I don't care about other people? Not in a spiritual journey. So no, not if you're walking the path of trying to find your higher self and be elevated beyond this particular life form to be a spiritual being, and perhaps come back as an ascended master, which is one of the things that our spirit guides are. If you've ever wondered who those people were, they managed to resolve their karma while they were in this form by choosing a spiritual path, which can happen even in times of deprivation, even in survival mode. And that's who your ascended masters are. So your spirit guides are not always those people. Some people, spirit guides has to do with people who they would not be able to move forward into another life unless they resolved some karma that they had accumulated, so they stayed behind to help others. I think we've gone into enough of the mindset management. Let's talk a little bit about the magic work that you can do, the spiritual work you can do. What you want to do is have a space. It can be your countertop, it can be your kitchen table, but you want a space that's not going to be disturbed. And please make it fireproof, because we are dealing with candles. And if you're like, I don't have anything that's fireproof, put it on a baking sheet. Please try to make sure that you're as safe as you can with fire, because fire contains rebirth in it, but it also contains destruction. And so you just have to be a little bit careful with it. So you're going to have one candle for the divinities, one for the goddess and one for the god. Now, if you happen to work within one particular belief system, you're just honoring the balance of masculine and feminine energy within the divine. So just one for each side for the duality within. And then you're going to have something called an intention candle. So we're talking about 3 candles. Now, your intention candle is where you would put things like a conjure oil for more money, or for releasing blockages, or for breaking curses. All of these things are available. Art of the Root is the one that I always recommend for beginners because it's a little bit weak. So it's great for beginners where you're not really sure what you're doing yet, and you don't want any, like, giant misfires, which could happen. I swear sooner or later I really will do the misfires podcast, but it's a long story and it's actually hard to tell. And then it's great for experts whose personal energy can override that. So if you're super advanced, and I use Art of the Root because, like, I'm pretty advanced at this point. I'm considered a high priestess, and I did a lot of work, including a hermetic phase that involved my really leaning into that lone wolf energy. But if you've never done it before, Art of the Root available through Amazon, and I'm not affiliated with them. I won't get a darn thing if you order from them. I just know that their stuff will work. And you can anoint it with spell breakers, with blockage removals, with force of nature is another one. These are all the things to try and bring your elements into balance. You can also anoint it with simple olive oil, but again, that is for people who've been practicing for a little bit, and, like, you need to be able to have something help you program your intent. And you have an intention candle. You can color code it to whatever particular area that you're working with. If you're dealing with your heart chakra, you can use red, which is for love, or you can use green, which is the color of your heart chakra. Money can be gold or it can be green if you're trying to resolve ancestral curses around that. But you can also use the color of the third eye, which is a violet energy, because you're trying to release spirit attachments, because things don't just exist in the 3D. So you have 3 candles. You have an intention candle. It can be completely plain, with you've just held it in your hands after smoke cleansing it, which is passing it through some form of incense or sage. I'm begging you not to use sage unless you are part of an indigenous practice or you are part of a belief system that tells you should. And it's because it's endangered and it will compound a karmic problem. Palo Santo and sage can compound a karmic problem because anybody using it is ignoring that it is a dwindling resource. Juniper works, lavender works, rosemary works. There are other things available that are equally cleansing, that are in absolute abundant supply. Please go towards them, because you don't want to be like, hey, I'm resolving this ancestral karma and creating others because I am taking a religious herb from an indigenous group. Can you see where the problem is? Taking a religious herb from an indigenous group and threatening its survival even more. So you're incurring more karmic debt as you're trying to resolve it. It's not to blame nor shame a single soul, just please keep it in mind. There are other things to do. So you smoke cleanse it. Incense is the easiest way to get out of that one. Run it through smoke. And why? It's supposed to remove the personal energies of anyone who has touched it. You just want your energy on it. And then you can anoint it. There are Ray Buckland's Candle Magic book is I don't recommend the spells in it, although they do work. It will tell you how to set up an altar. It will tell you how to anoint a candle. You can carve the candle as well with your name and birth date 3 times on it. And then anoint it with the conjure oil or the olive oil of what you're working for. And you're simply calling out to your ancestors with gratitude. This is the part where trauma survivors are like, I'm not so freaking grateful to the people who left me with this incredible painful burden. Please remember those people were muddling through in a time that they did not have an advanced, sophisticated understanding of emotional and psychiatric and psychological construction. Many of them were good people who were badly, badly, badly damaged and reached for poor coping tools, like relationships, like trying to find their value in who wanted them, like substance abuse. So many people had unmedicated disorders with anxiety, depression, bipolar. We didn't invent these things, we just understand them now. Try to forgive your ancestors for not having the tools that you have available to you, and understand that everything that you like about yourself has to do with them as well. One of the weirder experiences I ever had was reading someone's blog, and this was a good 15, 20 years ago, I guess. It was a long time ago. Reading somebody's blog, and they were talking about sharing the love letters between one of their ancestors. And it was the weirdest thing because I recognized the writing style. I was like, well, that sounds like my family. That is the weirdest thing. They have the same strange sense of humor. They use too many words. I'm aware of that one, guys. They use too many words where like 3 would do. They're using 13 because they love language. And sure enough, eventually it would be revealed that this person also traced back to Rebecca Nurse. So technically, that person I was reading, and they were in Canada. Like I've never met this person. They were actually Norwegian, or Norwegian extraction. That they were a very, very, very distant relative of mine. That gift with language had carried forward and carried forward and carried forward, including into this woman who was writing a very good and coherent and entertaining blog, that there had always been a gift of language within my ancestral line, and it was passed to others. And that's something else to keep in mind. The family that you remember, the family that you have traced, there's more to it than that. It stretches back to ancient civilization, which we have a tendency to think of as being primitive, and it wasn't. It wasn't. That's one of the things that we need to keep in mind is civilizations rise and fall over and over again. And like Rome didn't start it, y'all. Like I know we really prized the Roman Empire, but that was because they were conquest driven. But there were many sophisticated societies with rule of law and sometimes equality and all kinds of things present before they were over there. So, there may be civilizations we absolutely know nothing about as well, and they had advanced architecture, and they're all disappeared without a trace in some instances because we can't understand their language. Things weren't documented in the same way. I need you to understand something. We are at risk of that as a world right now because everything's digital. Everything's digital. Everything's digital. We are putting very few things into a permanent record that can be discovered when we are the dinosaurs. Remember, we are tomorrow's dinosaurs, every single last one of us. It can become very easy to feel like we're evolved and better than. But there are people as little as 20 years in the future who will look back at us and go, oh my God. It's the easiest thing to point out that is that if you look at the early 2000s and the fat shaming of absolutely lovely young women who definitely didn't need to lose any weight, but it was like a flock of vultures converging on people like Jessica Simpson, is that her name? I'm sorry, I'm not big on celebrity culture, but like she looked absolutely lovely. If you could look back at those pictures where people were fat shaming her and picking her apart at the seams in the case of internalized misogyny, we will find that fat phobia is the one that is really just as part of what led to the body positivity movement, because it became so cruel and so bullying and so pervasive within, like, we need to feel better about ourselves, so let's pick on this group of people. And that's within my living memory, and it's within a lot of people's living memory. That is how much things can change and evolve and grow. And that to remember everything that you believe now is the seed of something that will grow into something more expansive if we do this correctly. It's part of the reason that one of the arguments I was always having with a friend about things like, this is going to be out of left field, people, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was considered a feminist show at the time. And Joss Whedon turned out to be, but that notwithstanding for a moment, it doesn't date well. It doesn't age well, but it shouldn't. If a progressive work when it comes to expanding our consciousness, and please quit making the word progressive negative. Progress is that root word. We want to make progress. If a progressive work looks really dated now, it did its job, because it could only be expanded to the point that the overall culture would allow at that particular time. So it was very progressive for the time. It was very groundbreaking, talking about women and their power and not needing a man. And at the root of it, like, everybody in that wants a man. So it's that's why it doesn't date all that well. But to remember that part is to not be too entrenched in your viewpoints, understanding that they will date. And it doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make you wrong. There's nothing wrong with the need to grow as a society and as a civilization. Is what we're meant to do. And as yet another way to honor your ancestors. We're going to circle back to, you have these 2 candles, you have your intention candle, and what an offering is. Every single time I go into offerings, people push back with, I feel bad, I feel bad, I feel bad. I feel bad wasting food. Okay, if you think you're wasting it, you're not approaching it as an offering. You're not. Because you think it's being wasted. So that is one way to look at it. Having said that, if you really simply, because you are meant to dispose of offerings. Now, you can put them outside for animals to eat. That is one way that you can dispose of them. But most of the things we do for offerings are not, meant to be eaten by squirrels and birds. But you are meant to bless, empower, and activate it when you put it down as an offering, and that is a sacrifice of your personal energy. Giving some of your energy creates space for you to receive. So you're giving that to your ancestors, honoring their sacrifice, honoring their struggle, honoring their own pain, and thanking them for the gifts that they did leave you with, even if they left you with burdens as well. There's more to people than the worst side of them. We have a tendency to judge people almost entirely by the worst side of them. And the people that you didn't know went through more than you can ever possibly imagine. They did the best that they could. Honor the perseverance of their soul that gave you the strength that you have now. So you create an offering with that. And particularly in the month of October, like if you're really trying to resolve gigantic amounts of generational karma and generational curses, and how will you know? You will know. You will know. You'll have people dropping dead. You'll have mental illness. You'll have all kinds of like pronounced calamity within your life. If you have all of that, there is a generational curse upon your family. And it is not that you did something bad. It's just it's an opportunity to grow, to release it, and to become the best person that you can, and do the best that you can within this world, simply as you are. And perfection is not the goal, but the idea of having good intent is. Good intent clears your karma. It's that simple. So you lead out an offering as well, simply to thank them for their willingness to be there with you and help support you through your own journey, and to honor who they were rather than judging who they were. So what if you really cannot stand to put out food because you're like, no, I went through food deprivation. I look at the people who don't have running water right now and don't have food, and I just can't do it. That's okay. You do flowers. You can also do art pieces where you draw things as well. And it does not have to be good. You are putting forward your energy, the sacrifice of something that you have to give. You are giving so that you can receive. To receive, you need to give. And that is just part. And if now everybody will hold up examples of people like Jeff Bezos or Bezos, I don't know how I pronounce this, I don't care. As to like, they don't give. They do not have an emotionally rich world, even if it seems like they have every material thing. Like I said, they are currently doing things like shooting themselves into space, seeking enough sensation to make them truly feel. So they don't have inner worlds that you should ever envy. But in order to keep yourself in balance, which includes a robust emotional experience, you also need to make room to receive that love. So you put the love out there. That's what the sacrifice is. That's what the offering is. It's hard. Like, particularly when I talk about my family, like my mother and father both should have gone to jail. They just should have, for how violent they were towards each other. My mother, like CPS, should have been called on her about 50,000 times, and would have been in the modern day age. But like, it wasn't that time period. It wasn't that time period. So it didn't happen that way. But can I forgive her all of that? Sure, I can forgive her all of that. There's also things I really, really like about myself that are directly related to having had that person as my mother. There is good with the bad. And when you put out an offering, which is one of the ways that forgiveness is another way to release your ancestral karma. Because we all get caught in the pain and we forget, oh, you were in pain too. That's how I finally just forgave both of my parents, who were incredibly damaging human beings to everybody they ever encountered. Seriously. Not always. Like, my mother could be a very covert narcissist, but like, what a damaging human being to anybody who was stupid enough to get close to her. Which is not to call other people stupid. It's just like, man, did they ever learn a hard lesson? But there are good things. And that is one of the things, is that you start to look at something for what it is rather than what it isn't. And that goes back to the gratitude. Gratitude is one of the ways that you can release karma. Is there anything else that you can do that has to do with an offering that won't make you feel as bad? Fancy coffees are good. Like having, if you get a pack of brioche buns or something, you can put one out. And then that's appropriate to give to birds. That's appropriate to leave out for the wildlife and things. If you really just are like, I can't take it. I cannot take the waste of food. Again, if you think of it as being wasted, you need to adjust your mind, because you're not thinking of it as an offering. You need to think of an offering as, I am inviting an actual human being, and I may be a host of them, into my home, and this is what I am giving them. If you would not think to a physical guest, my God, that is a waste, somebody else is eating my stuff, then you shouldn't think of it that way in terms of offerings. But I'm not I get it. So there are workarounds. There just genuinely are. And creation is one of, you can write them a story, you can write them a poem, you can draw them a picture. You can pick flowers if you can't afford flowers. You can go out on walks and find beautiful things in nature. Although if you're hiking, please remember that the whole leave no trace thing, you're not supposed to take stuff with you. Do everything you can with the best intent that you can, honoring the fact that our resources are limited. And one of the other ways that you can really begin to resolve your ancestral karma is having a good tie to your environment, leaving the smallest carbon footprint that you can, because you honor your resources that way. Deprivation mindset leads to desperation and survival mode, which almost always incurs other karmic burdens, because when people are in survival mode, they're okay with harming others to keep themselves safe and alive. And that's one of the biggest things that can incur karma. So ancestral work having to do with that is how you achieve financial security, is you are releasing and forgiving that deprivation mindset that led to survival mode, that led to the incurring of emotional and karmic debts, and sometimes the sustaining of poor coping mechanisms. And that's something to remember for the people around here who come from the narcissistic parents who are very damaging, who never honored their emotional world. And you may be missing a piece in your self-confidence, which is part of your power. And you can get it back. If you heal yourself, you learn how to like yourself. You accept the parts of you that you're working on. Loving yourself does not say, I'm just great as I am. I really love myself as a human being. I know I'm a really, really good egg as a person. But there will be things I am working on for the rest of my life because I have big everything. I don't mean I'm a big person. I'm actually kind of a dinky little person. But I have big sad, mad, glad. I have, like, it's having, the more personal power you have, the bigger your energies are. And that I will be working with the parts of my that can have a lesser expression of that particular energy and turning it towards a positive one for the rest of my life, because I have to keep everything in balance in order to get the best outcomes that I can, and so can you. Do your ancestral work, particularly on October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd. It is a time in which we are going into a darker season of the year when everything is resting, and that is the best time to do anything from the past, to release that ancestral work, to give yourself permission to do the healing that you need without the judgment of the people who came before you. They frequently developed poor coping mechanisms. That's what happened with both of my parents became narcissists. They were both only children. But when I look at my mom and I look at my grandmother, it's small wonder. It's small wonder. That was a really, really sick person who then made a really, really sick person who then really, really behaved in sick, sick ways. And that's normal. It's sad and it's hard and it's true. But like, she didn't grow up in a time where anything really would have helped her examine herself. And she's too insecure, quite frankly, to ever examine the ways in which she's at fault. Because when you have true confidence, when you have true self-love, you can look at the things that you're trying to improve. Don't look at them as faults. Look at them as things that you're trying to improve. And that is yet another way to resolve your ancestral karma and your ancestral curses, is doing your work. It's actually not that hard. It takes longer than we want it to. And please revisit the fact that your ancestral line stretches out long past where you could see it, long past its documentation. There is, like in all of us, there are these ancestral energies. There are all these ancient energies. Whenever they do DNA testing on the ancient bones that are found in the various countries, they're always like, well, we thought we knew where the people of Japan came from, but it turns out there's another third ethnic group that came in during a time of deprivation and flood in their own land. I am being literal right now. We only think we know where we came from. And we all trace back eventually to these smaller tribal groups, these smaller ancient groups. We all have ancestral influence in common. It's why we repeat patterns. But you can break the pattern by healing. You can break the pattern through gratitude. You can break the pattern through self-understanding and forgiveness of self and others. But please pay attention to that forgiveness of others as well. Now, there is a proviso with this, because a lot of us suffered really bad treatment at the hands of people that we love. If that person has not shown remorse, if they have not shown contrition, just concentrate on your healing. And eventually they won't matter to you. And that's essentially the exact same thing as forgiveness. It's the release of an energy. the release of resentment, hostility, and blame, which are all lesser aspects of our personal energy. And once we free ourselves from them, we live more in a gratitude and abundant energy. And that is the goal of doing your ancestral work. And in a grateful and an abundant energy, everything that you need, everything that would make your life more joyful and fuller can come to you. But you have to do your work first, and that begins within the autumnal season for a lot of people. But even if you're in a different hemisphere, remember there is an ancient tradition around the end of October and into the beginning of November that does have to do with the honoring of ancestors. And that is yet another way that you can do that. October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd, set up your candles, make the offering that you can make, peace with in your soul. There's one more thing. I've mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. If you sincerely cannot stand the thought of waste, give to a food bank. And your intent when you're dropping off that food is, this is an offering to my ancestors to help sustain other families. And there you go. You've done it. You've not wasted food, but you've made the offering. And you can speak all of this aloud. Speaking things aloud. The structure of time is happening all at once, which means that we have access to so many things. Speaking kindly to your ancestors of, I understand your struggles. I understand why you left me with so many burdens, but I celebrate you for the gifts that you left me with that gave me the abilities to overcome, to grow, and to become the most powerful version that our family line could achieve. If you're the person resolving your ancestral karma and your ancestral curses, you are what they were always trying to achieve in the first place, the best version of them that they could become. This has been Logical Magic, examining esoterica, the worth of our ancestral work, and achieving financial security. If you need to find me, you can find me at therisingmoon.com exclusively. I have a Patreon where we have spirit guide messages weekly and monthly. Some other things are going on there as well. I won't spoil it too terribly much. I have a YouTube as well, where you can find pick a card readings that I focus on healing trauma in the work that I do. It's not that I look down on predictive tarot. It's just, it's a Band-Aid on a cut that needs a healing. Predictive tarot can absolutely help. It's a good painkiller. It helps people soothe their anxiety, and I know what's coming up and now I feel prepared. But what really, 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 really helps a person is healing their trauma so they are the most powerful version of themselves. So I focus mostly on the healing work that we can do with a really, really good tool, which is the tarot. And someday I'll do a podcast on how to use the tarot for understanding your emotional work, but it won't be today, and it's not likely to be tomorrow, because we're all involved in our ancestral work right now. Take care, be well, and enjoy the season.